Hey there, viewer. Picture this, a kid named Jake Miller. He's 12 years old and seems super normal, at least, that's what everyone thinks. Jake's skinny, super quiet, and always has this old, beat-up backpack slung over his shoulder. At Lincoln Middle School, he's the kind of guy nobody really notices. He just blends in, like a shadow moving through the halls. But here's the cool part, Jake's hiding something. A huge secret. Something so big that nobody, not the teachers, not the other kids, not even the toughest bullies, has any clue about it. Before we jump into the story, I've got a little favor to ask. Drop a comment below and tell me, where are you watching from today? Maybe you're at home, or maybe you're sneaking a peek at school. Wherever you are, I wanna know. Oh, and if you like stories like this one, hit that subscribe button real quick. It'll make sure you don't miss out on more fun tales. Now, here's a question to get you thinking. Have you ever met someone who totally surprised you with something awesome? Maybe they seemed boring at first, but then bam, they did something amazing. Well, stick with me, because Jake's about to blow your mind in a way you won't believe. Okay, let's set the scene. Lincoln Middle School is a busy place. Every day, the schoolyard is full of noise, kids yelling, laughing, running around like crazy. The bell rings, sneakers squeak on the pavement, and voices bounce off the brick walls. For most kids, it's a fun spot to hang out with friends. But for Jake, it's different. For him, the schoolyard is like a jungle. A place where he has to watch his step and stay out of trouble. He's not the loud kid or the popular kid. He's just Jake. Head down, eyes on the ground, moving through the crowd like he's invisible. He doesn't talk much, doesn't cause a fuss. He just wants to get through the day. But here's the thing about trouble, it doesn't care if you're quiet. Trouble finds you anyway. And for Jake, trouble has a name. That name is Brad the Beast Tucker. Yep, Brad's the guy who's about to make Jake's life a whole lot harder. Let me tell you about him. Brad's in 6th grade, just like Jake, but that's where the similarities stop. Brad's big, like, really big. Taller than most kids, with shoulders wide enough to block a doorway. He's got messy brown hair and a grin that says he knows he's in charge. Everyone calls him the Beast because, well, he acts like one. Loud, tough, and always ready to push someone around. Brad's the kind of kid who struts through the schoolyard like he owns it. He's got a little group of buddies who follow him everywhere, laughing at his jokes and cheering him on. To them, Brad's the king. To everyone else, he's a problem. Jake's seen Brad plenty of times. Hard to miss a guy like that. But Jake doesn't mess with him. He keeps his distance, stays out of the way. He figures if he's quiet enough, Brad won't notice him. Spoiler alert, that doesn't work. Brad notices everyone, especially kids he thinks he can pick on. And Jake? With his skinny arms, quiet voice, and that old backpack. Jake's the perfect target. It starts small. One day, Jake's walking to class, minding his own business. Brad's hanging out by the lockers with his crew. He spots Jake and yells, "Hey, skinny Jake. Where you going with that ugly bag?" His friends crack up, pointing and giggling like it's the funniest thing ever. Jake doesn't say anything. He just keeps walking, head down, pretending he didn't hear. But Brad's not done. He jogs over, gets right in Jake's face, and gives him a little shove. Not hard enough to knock him over, but enough to make Jake stumble. "Oops," Brad says, grinning. "Watch where you're going, loser." That's how it begins. Just a shove, a laugh, a mean name. Nothing huge, right? But it's only the start. Brad's like a shark smelling blood. He's found someone he can mess with, and he's not gonna stop. Day after day, he keeps at it. Sometimes he knocks Jake's books out of his hands. Sometimes he accidentally bumps him in the lunch line. Every time, Jake picks himself up, grabs his stuff, and moves on. He doesn't fight back. He doesn't yell. He just takes it. But here's what Brad doesn't know, Jake's not as weak as he looks. That quiet kid with the beat-up backpack. He's got something up his sleeve. Something big. Something that's gonna turn this whole story upside down. Brad thinks he's the tough guy, the one in control. He has no idea what's coming. And neither do the other kids watching from the sidelines, whispering about how Jake never fights back. See, Jake's secret isn't just a little thing, like he's good at drawing or knows a cool magic trick. No, it's way bigger than that. It's the kind of secret that makes your jaw drop when you find out. The kind that changes everything. But right now, nobody knows. Not Brad, not his crew, not the teachers who see Jake shuffle through the halls. They all think he's just some quiet, skinny kid who's easy to push around. They're wrong. Oh man, are they wrong? So, what's Jake hiding? Why doesn't he tell anyone? And how long can he keep it under wraps with Brad the Beast Tucker on his case? That's what this story's all about. It's gonna take us on a wild ride through the schoolyard, the classrooms, and one crazy moment that'll flip everything you think you know about Jake Miller. Ready to find out what happens next? Good, because this is just the beginning, and trust me, you won't want to miss a single second. Okay, let's talk about Brad the Beast Tucker. At Lincoln Middle School, Brad was the boss of 6th grade, or at least, he acted like it. He wasn't just any kid. He was big, like a bear standing on two legs. His voice was loud, booming across the schoolyard so everyone could hear him. And he was never alone, he always had his crew with him. A little gang of boys who followed him around, nodding at everything he said. To them, Brad was the coolest. To everyone else, he was trouble with a capital T. Brad loved one thing more than anything, picking on kids who couldn't fight back. If you were small, quiet, or just different, watch out, Brad would find you. He'd tease you, push you, make you feel tiny. It was his favorite game. And out of all the kids at school, there was one he loved to mess with the most, Jake Miller. Jake was the perfect target for Brad. Skinny, quiet, always carrying that old backpack, Jake didn't look like he could stand up to anyone. Brad would spot him in the halls and yell, "Hey, Skinny Jake." His voice was mean and loud, echoing off the lockers. Then he'd charge over, give Jake a shove, and slam him right into the metal doors. Bang! Jake would stumble, his backpack sliding down his arm. "What's in that dumb bag?" Brad would laugh. "Your baby blanket? A teddy bear." His crew would crack up, slapping their knees like it was the best joke ever. They'd point at Jake and giggle while he stood there, fixing his stuff. But Jake? He didn't yell back. He didn't cry or run to a teacher. He'd just bend down, pick up whatever fell, his books, his pencil, whatever, and walk away. No big fuss. No angry words. Just silence. Most kids would have gotten mad or scared, but not Jake. If you looked real close, though, you'd see something. His eyes. They weren't soft or shaky like you'd expect. They were sharp, like a hawk watching its prey. Steady, like he was waiting for the right moment. Like he had a plan. Brad never noticed that. He was too busy laughing, too busy thinking he'd won. Brad thought Jake was weak. Ain't nobody. One day, it got worse. Jake was walking outside with his lunch, a sandwich and an apple in a brown paper bag. Brad saw him and grinned, that mean grin that said trouble was coming. He stomped over, snatched the bag right out of Jake's hands, and tossed it into the dirt. The sandwich fell out, smushing into the ground. The apple rolled away, covered in dust. "Oops," Brad said, not sorry at all. "You're nothing, Skinny Jake. Stay out of my way, loser." Then he turned around, high-fiving his friends as they cheered him on. Jake stood there for a second, looking at his ruined lunch. The other kids nearby peeked over, whispering to each other. Some giggled, some looked away. Nobody helped. Jake didn't say a word. He just picked up the apple, wiped it on his shirt, and walked off. Brad laughed louder, thinking he'd won again. "See ya, loser," he shouted. His crew howled like it was a big victory. But here's the thing Brad didn't get, Jake wasn't just taking it. Oh no. Every shove, every mean word, every ruined lunch, it was all stacking up. Like blocks in a tower, getting higher and higher. Jake wasn't crying inside. He wasn't giving up. He was remembering. Every time Brad pushed him, Jake tucked it away in his mind. Every insult, every laugh, he kept track. Not with a notebook or anything like that. Just in his head, quiet and calm. Brad thought he was breaking Jake down, making him smaller. He had no idea he was wrong. See, Brad only saw what was on the outside. A skinny kid with messy hair and an old backpack. A kid who didn't fight back. To Brad, that meant Jake was scared, weak, easy to boss around. He didn't know what was going on inside Jake's head. He didn't see those sharp eyes or wonder why Jake stayed so calm. Brad was too full of himself, too busy being the big tough guy. He thought he was the king, and Jake was just a bug he could step on. The other kids saw it too. They'd watch Brad pick on Jake and think, poor Jake, he's got no chance. Some felt bad, but they didn't say anything. Others joined in, giggling with Brad because it was safer that way. Nobody asked why Jake didn't run or tell. Nobody thought he might be more than he looked. They all figured he was just quiet little Jake, the kid who took it and moved on. But that stack of shoves and insults. It wasn't making Jake weaker. It was doing something else. Something Brad couldn't guess. Every time Brad pushed him, Jake got a little stronger, not in his arms or legs, but in his mind. He wasn't scared. He wasn't mad. He was waiting. For what? Brad didn't know. Nobody did. Not yet. Days turned into weeks, and Brad kept going. One time, he accidentally bumped Jake so hard his books flew everywhere. Papers scattered across the hall, and Brad's crew laughed like it was a show. Another time, he poured water from his bottle onto Jake's backpack when Jake wasn't looking. The bag got all wet, and Jake had to carry it anyway. Oops, my bad. Brad said, smirking. Jake just shook the water off and kept walking. Brad thought he was winning every time. He thought Jake was nothing, just a punching bag for his fun. But that stack in Jake's head? It was growing. Every mean move, every nasty word, it was all there, locked away. Jake wasn't forgetting a single thing. And those sharp eyes of his? They were watching Brad closer than Brad could ever imagine. So, the tension was building. Brad kept pushing, thinking he was the strongest, the toughest. Jake kept taking it, quiet as ever. The schoolyard was like a stage, and the show was just getting started. What was Jake waiting for? Why didn't he snap or run? Brad didn't care to ask. He didn't think it mattered. Oh, but it did. It mattered a lot. Because something big was coming, and Brad the Beast Tucker had no clue he was walking right into it. Weeks went by at Lincoln Middle School, and things with Brad the Beast Tucker got worse. A lot worse. He didn't just shove Jake anymore, he turned it into a game. One day, Jake was walking down the hall, carrying his books. Brad stuck out his foot, quick as a snake, and tripped him. Jake stumbled, his books flying everywhere. Papers slid across the floor, and Brad's crew laughed like it was the funniest show ever. Nice moves, Skinny Jake. Brad shouted, clapping his hands. Jake didn't say a word. He just got up, grabbed his stuff, and kept going. Another time, Brad saw Jake sitting at a lunch table, reading a book. He snuck up with a water bottle, tipped it over, and dumped the whole thing on Jake's books. The pages got all soggy and stuck together. Oops. Brad said, grinning big. Guess you need new books, loser. His friends howled, pointing at the mess. Jake shook the water off his hands, picked up the wet books, and walked away. Calm as ever. Then there was the gym shoe day. Jake was in the locker room, getting ready for class. Brad waited until Jake turned around, then snatched his sneakers right off the bench. He held them up high, waving them like a prize. Who's gonna make me give these back? He teased. Nobody said anything. Jake had to do gym in his socks that day, sliding around on the floor. Brad tossed the shoes in a corner later, laughing with his buddies. The other kids saw it all. Some giggled along with Brad. Some looked away, pretending they didn't notice. But not one of them stood up to him. Brad was too big, too loud, too mean. Jake, though. He didn't cry or yell. He stayed quiet. Too quiet, maybe. His face didn't show anger or fear, just nothing. One afternoon, a teacher caught Brad in the act. He just pushed Jake into a wall, hard enough to make a thud. The teacher, Mrs. Carter, crossed her arms and frowned. Brad, stop that, she snapped. Then she turned to Jake. Why don't you fight back, Miller? Say something. Jake just shrugged, his shoulders barely moving. No point, he mumbled, his voice soft. Mrs. Carter shook her head, her lips tight. You can't just let him do that, she said, thinking Jake was scared. She walked off, muttering about bullies. Brad smirked like he'd won again. But Jake's eyes? They stayed sharp, watching everything. The other kids started to wonder. Jake took all the stuff, trips, water, stolen shoes, and never snapped. How? Most kids would have run to the principal or told their parents by now. Not Jake. He kept coming to school, kept walking the halls, kept carrying that beat-up backpack. It was weird. Too weird. And then, something even stranger happened. It was gym class, a sunny day outside. The coach blew his whistle and said, "Everyone's running laps today. 3 times around the field go." Brad puffed out his chest. "I'm gonna win," he bragged, loud enough for the whole class to hear. "Nobody's faster than me." His crew cheered him on, clapping like he was already the champ. The whistle blew again, and off they went. Kids ran, sneakers pounding the grass. Brad took off like a rocket, his big legs pumping. Jake started slower, just jogging along behind. By the end, Brad crossed the finish line first barely. He bent over, hands on his knees, huffing and puffing like a tired dog. His face was red, sweat dripping down his forehead. "Told you," he wheezed, forcing a grin. Then Jake crossed the line, right after him. Second place. But here's the crazy part, Jake didn't look tired at all. Not one bit. His breathing was normal, like he'd just walked across the room. No sweat, no red face, just calm. He stood there, hands in his pockets, looking like it was no big deal. A kid nearby blinked. "How'd he do that?" he whispered to his friend. "Brad's dying, and Jake's fine." Another kid nodded, eyes wide. "That's weird, right?" Brad heard them and glared over, his chest still heaving. He didn't say anything, though. Just wiped his face and turned away. The class went quiet for a second, watching Jake. Something didn't add up. Then, a few days later, another clue popped up. Jake was in the cafeteria, grabbing his lunch tray. His backpack slipped off his shoulder and hit the floor with a thump. When it fell, something slid out, a little patch, about the size of a hand. It was black with a dragon stitched on it, all twisty and cool looking. A girl sitting close by leaned over. "Hey, what's that?" she asked, pointing. Jake's head snapped up fast. He grabbed the patch in a flash and stuffed it back in his bag. "Nothing," he said, quick and quiet. He zipped the backpack shut and walked off, leaving the girl staring after him. She turned to her friend. "Did you see that? A dragon patch? That's not nothing." Her friend shrugged. "Maybe it's from a jacket or something." But the girl shook her head. "He didn't want us to see it." "Why?" They kept talking, their voices low. Soon, other kids heard. Whispers started buzzing around the lunchroom. "Jake's got a dragon patch." "What's it mean?" He acted all sneaky about it. Nobody knew what it was, but they knew one thing, something was up with Jake Miller. Brad didn't hear about the patch, he was too busy tossing fries at his crew across the room. But the rest of the school? They were starting to watch Jake closer. He wasn't just the quiet kid anymore. Little things like the running, the patch made them wonder. Was he hiding something? Why didn't he ever get mad at Brad? Most kids would have cracked by now, with all the tripping and teasing. Not Jake. He just kept going, day after day, like none of it bothered him. The tension was growing. Brad kept picking on Jake, thinking he was the big boss. He'd laugh, shove, tease, same old stuff. But those small moments, the calm after the run, the mysterious patch, were like puzzle pieces. Tiny hints that Jake wasn't who he seemed. The other kids noticed. They didn't know what it all meant yet, but they could feel it, something big was coming. Brad didn't see it. He was too busy being the beast, too sure he had Jake figured out. He thought Jake was weak, a pushover. Oh, how wrong he was. Jake stayed quiet, letting Brad do his thing. But those sharp eyes of his, they never stopped watching. Every trip, every splash of water, every mean laugh, it was all building up to something. The school was like a pot of water on the stove, getting hotter and hotter. Soon, it was gonna boil over. And when it did, well, let's just say Brad wasn't ready for what was coming next. Okay, Get ready, this is the moment everything flips upside down. It was a regular afternoon at Lincoln Middle School, right after the last bell rang. Kids were spilling out of the building, heading home, or hanging around. The basketball courts out back were buzzing with noise, kids shouting, balls bouncing, sneakers squeaking on the pavement. That's where it all went down. The day everything changed. Brad the Beast Tucker was there, like always, with his crew. They were laughing and messing around, acting like they owned the place. Then they spotted Jake Miller. He was walking by himself, that old beat-up backpack slung over one shoulder, heading past the courts. Brad's eyes lit up with that mean sparkle he got when he saw Jake. "Hey, Skinny Jake," he yelled, loud enough for everyone to hear. His crew turned, grinning, ready for their daily fun. They jogged over, circling Jake like a pack of wolves. Kids nearby stopped playing, turning to watch. They knew what was coming, or so they thought. Brad stepped closer, cracking his knuckles one by one. Pop, pop, pop. It sounded tough, and he knew it. "Time to teach you a lesson, Skinny," he said, his voice all cocky. He smirked, showing his teeth, and puffed out his chest. His crew nodded, egging him on. "Yeah, get him, Brad," one shouted. Brad balled up his fist, pulled his arm back, and swung hard. A big, fast punch aimed right at Jake's face. Everyone watching held their breath. They'd seen this before. Jake would duck or dodge, maybe fall, and Brad would laugh. That's how it always went. Everyone expected Jake to hit the ground. But not this time. Jake moved super fast. Faster than a blink, faster than anyone could believe. Brad's fist flew through the air, but it didn't hit Jake. Nope. Jake ducked down, smooth and quick, like he'd done it a million times. Before Brad could even figure out what happened, Jake grabbed his arm right in mid-swing. With one fast twist, he yanked Brad's arm behind his back and pushed it up. Brad let out a loud yelp, like a dog that got its tail stepped on. His knees buckled, and down he went plop right onto the pavement. On his knees, arm pinned, looking up at Jake with big, shocked eyes. The crew froze. Their mouths dropped open, hanging there like broken gates. "What the?" one of them stammered, his voice squeaky. Another kid dropped the basketball he was holding. It bounced away, forgotten. The crowd around the courts went dead quiet. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. They just stared. Brad, the big tough beast, was on the ground. And Jake? Skinny, quiet Jake. He was standing over him, cool as a breeze. Jake let go of Brad's arm and took a step back. Brad scrambled to sit up, rubbing his wrist, still wide-eyed. Jake's voice came out low but clear, cutting through the silence. "I'm done with this," he said. Not yelling, not mad, just firm. Like he meant it. Then he did something nobody expected. He reached down to that old backpack, the one Brad always made fun of. He unzipped it slow and steady, letting the sound fill the air's zip. Everyone leaned in, craning their necks to see. What was he pulling out? Jake's hand came up holding something black and shiny. He held it high so everyone could see. It was a belt, a black belt. Not just any belt, either. Gold letters sparkled on it, stitched right into the fabric. They said, "Junior Martial Arts Champion, 2024. The crowd gasped, a big whoosh of air all at once. Eyes popped wide. Kids whispered to each other, fast and excited. "A black belt? No way. Is that real?" Brad's face went white, like he'd seen a ghost. He didn't move, just sat there on the ground, staring up at Jake. A kid in the crowd, one of the smaller ones who'd never dared talk to Brad, stepped closer. "You're a fighter?" he asked, his voice shaky, eyes huge. Jake turned to him and nodded, simple as that. "Yeah," he said. "Been training since I was 5. He shrugged, like it was no big deal. "I just don't like showing off." Then he looked down at Brad, still sitting there like a lump. "Or hurting people who don't deserve it," he added. His voice was calm, but it hit hard. Everyone heard it. Everyone felt it. The air buzzed. Kids started talking all at once, their voices piling up. "He's a champion. Since he was 5. Brad didn't know. The crew backed up a step, looking at each other like they didn't know what to do. Brad blinked fast, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. He wasn't grinning anymore. The beast wasn't so big now. Jake stood there, holding that black belt, letting everyone see it. The gold letters caught the sunlight, shining bright. It wasn't just a belt, it was proof. Proof he wasn't weak. Proof he'd been strong all along. All those weeks of Brad pushing him, tripping him, dumping water on his books, Jake could have stopped at any time. But he didn't. He waited. And now, right here on the basketball courts, he showed them why. The crowd couldn't stop staring. A girl near the front whispered, "That's why he wasn't scared." Her friend nodded. He could have beat Brad up anytime. Another kid piped up, "Remember the running? He didn't even get tired." It all clicked. The little hints, the calm, the sharp eyes, the way he moved, they made sense now. Jake wasn't just some quiet kid. He was a martial arts champ. A real one. Brad finally got to his feet, slow and wobbly. His face was still pale, his hands shaking. He didn't look at Jake. He didn't look at anyone. The crew didn't cheer him on this time. They just stood there, awkward and quiet. Jake folded the black belt and slid it back into his backpack. He zipped it up, slung it over his shoulder, and turned to walk away. But before he did, he glanced at Brad one last time. "Leave me alone," he said. Not loud, not mean, just clear. Then he walked off, head up, step steady. The kids watched him go, their whispers growing louder. "He's so cool. Brad's done for. I can't believe it." The basketball courts felt different now. Brad wasn't the king anymore. Jake had flipped the whole game in one move, one fast, amazing move. The big reveal was out, and nobody would forget it. Not Brad, not his crew, not the crowd. Skinny Jake wasn't Skinny Jake anymore. He was Jake, the champion. And the best part? This was just the start of what everyone would say about him next. The next day at Lincoln Middle School, everything was different. Word about what happened on the basketball court spread like wildfire, like when you whisper a secret and suddenly everyone knows. By morning, every kid in every classroom was talking about it. "Did you hear? Skinny Jake's a champ. He took Brad down in, like, 2 seconds. He's got a black belt." The news buzzed through the halls, the cafeteria, the playground, everywhere. Jake Miller wasn't just some quiet kid anymore. He was the talk of the school. Brad the Beast Tucker? He didn't look so tough now. When he walked in that morning, his head was down, his shoulders slumped. No loud voice, no cracking knuckles, no big grin. He didn't even glance at Jake. Not once. Kids noticed that, too. "Brad's scared now," one whispered. "He won't mess with Jake again," another said. And they were right. Brad didn't just stop picking on Jake, he stopped picking on everyone. No more shoving kids into lockers, no more tripping people in the halls. The beast was quiet, like someone had flipped his off switch. His crew didn't follow him around as much either. They split off, looking lost without their leader. The principal, Mrs. Henderson, heard all about it, of course. Nothing big happens at school without her knowing. She called Jake to her office during first period. Kids saw him walking down the hall and whispered, "Uh-oh, is he in trouble?" But when Jake got there, Mrs. Henderson wasn't mad. She stood up from her desk, looked at him with a serious face, and then stuck out her hand. Jake shook it, a little confused. "I heard what happened yesterday," she said. "You could have ended that kid, hurt him bad. Why didn't you?" Jake shrugged, his usual move. "Fighting's not about hurting," he said, his voice soft but sure. "It's about control." Mrs. Henderson raised her eyebrows, then smiled, a real smile, not a fake one. "That's smart, Jake," she said. "Really smart. I'm impressed." She patted his shoulder. "You're a good kid. Keep it up." Jake nodded and left, heading back to class. The principal didn't call Brad in. She didn't need to. He'd already learned his lesson the hard way. Back in the schoolyard, things flipped fast. The other kids didn't avoid Jake anymore, they crowded around him like he was a superstar. At recess, a bunch of them ran over, their eyes big and excited. "Jake! Jake!" a small boy shouted. "Can you show us a kick? Please." A girl tugged his sleeve. "How'd you get so good at fighting?" Another kid piped up, "Can you teach me to beat up bullies?" Jake didn't act big or bossy. He just grinned a little, his first real smile in forever, and said, "Okay, I'll show you some stuff." He dropped his backpack and stood in the middle of the group. "This is a front kick," he said, lifting his leg slow so they could see. Then he snapped it out, fast and smooth, stopping before it hit anything. "Whoa," the kids yelled, clapping like crazy. "Do it again," someone begged. Jake did, then showed them a simple block how to stop a punch with your arm. "You don't need to fight," he told them. "Just protect yourself." They nodded, hanging on every word. For the rest of recess, Jake was their teacher, showing little moves and tricks. He didn't brag or show off, he just helped, quiet and calm like always. Brad saw it all from the other side of the yard. He was sitting alone on a bench, kicking at the dirt. No crew, no laughs, no nothing. His king days were done. Kids walked past him without a second look. Before, they'd duck away, scared he'd pick on them. Now, they didn't care. Brad wasn't the boss anymore. He'd lost his power, and he knew it. Every time Jake's group cheered, Brad's shoulders slumped lower. He didn't say a word, just slunk away when the bell rang, disappearing into the crowd. Jake, though. He wasn't the quiet kid hiding in the shadows anymore. He was something new. Something big. Kids who used to laugh at him now waved when he walked by. "Hey, Jake," they'd call. "You're awesome." Even the teachers noticed. In gym class, the coach said, "Miller, why don't you lead the warm ups today?" Jake did, and everyone followed along, copying his stretches. At lunch, a couple of bigger kids, ones who'd never talked to him before, sat at his table. "That was cool yesterday," one said. "Brad deserved it?" Jake just nodded, eating his sandwich, but you could tell he liked it. The school felt different now. Lighter, maybe. With Brad knocked down a peg, kids weren't so scared to be themselves. The little ones he used to tease ran around laughing again. The quiet ones didn't hide as much. Jake didn't turn into some loud, bossy guy, he stayed Jake. But now, everyone saw him for real. They saw the champ he'd always been, even when he didn't show it. By the end of the week, Jake's story was legend. Kids told it over and over, adding extra bits each time. "He flipped Brad like a pancake," one said. "He's secretly a ninja," another giggled. Jake didn't mind. He'd walk through the halls, that old backpack on his shoulder, and kids would smile or give him a thumbs up. He'd nod back, keeping it simple. That's who he was: strong, quiet, and good. Brad didn't try anything again. Not with Jake, not with anyone. He'd learned his lesson, and it stuck. One day, a kid dropped his books near Brad in the hall. Before, Brad would have kicked them or laughed. This time, he just stepped over and kept going. Nobody could believe it. "Brad's scared of Jake now," they said. Maybe he was. Or maybe he just didn't want to mess with someone who could twist his arm like a pretzel. Jake didn't need to fight again. He didn't want to. That one moment on the courts was enough. It showed everyone what he could do. And that was that. He went back to his normal stuff: school, lunch, recess, but now he was the hero they didn't see coming. The kid who'd been pushed around turned out to be the strongest one there. Not with fists or yelling, but with control, like he'd told the principal. That's what made him special. So, justice got served. Brad lost his crown, and Jake got the respect he deserved. The school wasn't perfect. Kids still argued or got mad sometimes, but it was better. All because one quiet boy with a black belt stood up, just once, and changed everything. So, that's Jake Miller's story. The kid nobody saw coming turned out to be the strongest of all. Pretty cool, right? It makes you think, who's around you right now, hiding something amazing? Maybe the quiet kid in class has a big secret, just like Jake. Sometimes, the ones who don't talk much have the best surprises. And bullies like Brad, they never guess what's coming until it's too late. What about you? Should Jake have shown his secret earlier? Tell me in the comments below. Let's keep this fun going together.